Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you're well. It's Alessio. In this video, I have a treat for you. I'm going to talk about the 3 predictions I got wrong and what lessons we can learn from them. Now you're probably thinking, well, why don't we just talk about all the predictions that I got wrong, right? So, well, if we had all the time in the world, I'm sure we could do it, but we don't. What I want to focus on are the 3 predictions that actually we can learn important lessons from. So let's go ahead. Firstly, before we look at the chart, I want to say that back the first prediction I got wrong massively. This is quite an embarrassing one. Back in 2013, I was doing an interview with Peter Schiff, famous investor in gold, and also Brian Rose. In that interview, I made a terrible call, made a terrible prediction that essentially that in a few years, nobody was going to talk about Bitcoin, that Bitcoin was just a passing fad at the time, and that Bitcoin was just in a bubble, and everybody was going to forget about Bitcoin in a few years. Yeah, I know, it's a terrible, terrible call. I'm immensely embarrassed about it. But look, these things happen. So one important lesson we can learn from it, look, I probably should be more open-minded about these new trends and new things that are happening in technology and in the markets. However, there is one thing I was right about back at the time. In 2013, I warned strongly about the immense bubble that was happening, well, the immense parabolic rise. Let me show you this chart, what I'm talking about. In this chart, you will see that in 2013, there was an immensely massive and dangerous parabolic rise in the price of Bitcoin, and I was correct in warning against it, saying, look, this is going to end badly, it's going to be very dangerous, and anybody who is essentially getting in on that is potentially going to lose their money down the line. And in fact, it is true because many people who bought at the highs there essentially lost their money down the line. Now, of course, I know he eventually managed to recover, but the fact is it was a dangerous time to buy that parabolic rise. So let's go to the next major prediction. Back in 2018, last year, I made a terrible decision in the sense that essentially I ignored one of my most important rules.
Dude.
One of the most important rules I learned in technical analysis and chart analysis, which I actually learned this from my good friend Charlie Burton, which I'll tell you about, is that the more times price comes to test a key level, the more times price comes to touch a key level, the more likely it is it's going to eventually break that level. So this is actually a rule that I warned about last year. The problem is I ignored it to my detriment in November, October of last year.
That was a bad idea, man.
So as you can see from this chart, back in November, October of last year, Bitcoin came to test that key level over and over again, came to test 6,000 over and over again. What did I do? Well, I ignored that important rule. The more times price comes to test the key level, like the 6,000 level, the more likely it is it's going to break it. Why did I ignore it? This is the key lesson. The reason why I probably ignored it was one, confirmation bias. For some reason in my mind, I thought that maybe Bitcoin was carving out a bottom, and also more importantly, seasonality. Seasonality got in my head, and bottom line is, for some reason I ignored it, and you can see Bitcoin broke below that level. One important lesson I learned from that, guys, is really the more times price comes to test the key level, the more likely it is going to break it. So let's not forget that. Prediction number 3, which I got wrong, and this is the thing that happened in 2011. Let's look at this chart. Back in 2011, there was a massive drop in the price of the stock markets. The stock markets carved out a double bottom pattern. Here's the thing, I ignored some important things that are happening on the chart. The reason I ignored these important things on the chart is because, again, confirmation bias, which is a dangerous psychological bias. I was really hoping the markets were going to go into some kind of bear market, and I mistakenly said that market was toast, and we're going to enter a major bear market.
You're kidding me.
I was wrong, and you can see that the market's actually carving out a double bottom pattern, false breakout with divergence, positive divergence, and a break of resistance. That essentially taught everyone that essentially make decisions based on what you see, not on what you think. Of course, I changed my mind and went bullish a few weeks after. The fact is, even though we got some things wrong, the fact is we also have got many things right. It hasn't always been bad. For example, we were right to warn about the dangerous parabolic rise in Bitcoin in 2017. I warned there's a massive bubble is going to burst, and that was correct. It did eventually crash, of course, by 80–90%. I was right that Bitcoin was going to bounce to the 200 moving average on the daily time frame, for example. I was also correct to warn about the drop in the British pound this year in 2019, which of course the British pound did collapse this year. I was right to warn about the stock market drop last year. I was also right to warn about the rise in gold this year. And I was also correct about the drop in Tesla. So there's several things we got right.
Bravo.
The fact is, guys, it is important to mention this. It is important to mention that really 2019 probably has not been my greatest year when it comes to Bitcoin. One of the reasons for that is perhaps because it's possible I may have been a bit overcautious and rather conservative in my approach to Bitcoin. However, I should just mention why I was cautious and conservative about this. One important thing people have said to me is, why is it that I did not call a bottom in Bitcoin perhaps much sooner, back near about April or March, or maybe let's say April, May. Well, let's just talk about this. Take a look at this chart. This is a weekly chart of Bitcoin. So in this, as you can see here on this weekly chart of Bitcoin, you will see that Bitcoin broke key resistance back really not in April, but in May. More or less, it was in May time when Bitcoin broke through that resistance, 6,000 level, the blue line you see there, and also broke above the 50 simple moving average. And the reason why I was being cautious there, and the reason why we were being careful about not calling a bottom way too early, is because often price comes back up to test that trend line, to test that resistance, previous lows on Bitcoin, and also the 50 simple moving average. Often price comes back up, reverts to that mean, reverts to that level, and then fails and drops back down again. So I think it was the right approach we took. I do think I took the right approach by being just a bit more careful and cautious and waiting for price to actually break through that level, which it did that in May. In May, it broke through the 50 simple moving average on that chart and broke through resistance of 6,000. And until Bitcoin did that, there was no high probability that Bitcoin had potentially reversed trend, because it could easily come back up to that level and then suddenly failed and drop back down again. And as a matter of fact, it did do that back in 2015. It came back to resistance, the 50 moving average, and then failed and dropped back down again. So I do think we took the right approach. I don't think that was a mistake. I do think it was the correct approach by waiting for price to come back up, break through that resistance, break through the 50 simple moving average, and then showing a potential reversal in the trend and a potential bull market. So that's the simple way of putting about it. So if you just leave that chart for a moment, guys. Fact is, guys, look, we're human beings. We can make mistakes, and we will make mistakes. That's just a fact. And nobody is ever going to be 100% right. We're going to make wrong calls eventually down the line. Nobody's 100% perfect. The bottom line is we need to follow rules, and we need to follow parameters. We need to be disciplined to follow our rules as well. So that's something important to mention here as well. And of course, we want to always learn as well. Thanks very much, guys. I'll see you next video.